Hey everyone, it's Patrick O'Leary. Today we're talking about how to align marketing with compliance and build strategies that actually work in high stakes environments. Joining me today is Yehuda Cagen, Senior Director of Marketing at Astiendo. Welcome and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You've led marketing and strategy teams in tech and compliance driven organizations. So let's start with the gap. You've written about how a compliant quality management system often fails real teams. Do you see a similar disconnect in marketing where the message checks the box, but doesn't match how the company really operates?
There are those schools of thought in marketing that you have to persuade someone to do something, right? I mean, and there's some level of persuasion, of course, but it has to be based on truths, right? That would be my personal opinion on marketing, because we've gotten to the point where it's not just three broadcast, television stations and a few newspapers, and then people can't really dig up the truth on their own. Now they could just do it within in the palm of their hand with one of these phones or computer, right? You can't.
Right.
I mean, first of all, you shouldn't be trying to deceive anyone. That's number one. But secondly, even if you do try, the people see right through you. So at its essence, I believe that marketing should be based on truths. Unfortunately, sometimes it could be a rarity that there's some half truths or some truths being left out. That if you are truthful and if you are basing it on something genuine, then you're going to stand out in and of itself, right? So I think there's a great benefit for people to base their marketing on truths and genuine reporting, if you will, on your own services or goods. So I think there's a great parallel. I will say, though, there's a little bit of a difference when it comes to marketing and maybe some other more black and white disciplines like accounting and finance, right? So marketing is more based on how people feel, right? And feelings are not a black and white matter often, and so that's where I create the distinction between the two, right? You're either compliant or you're not, right? You're either working towards the standards or you're not, right? Obviously, there are different degrees of those standards, but you could do it very well or just to get by. But with regard to marketing and communications and human behavior, when you're dealing with human behavior, there are a lot of things that we think conceptually, are the right thing to do. When I say right, I'm not talking about morally right, but the right marketing approach. And then you find out that it's not.
Right.
You find out that, oh, wait a second, I made it. And then so there's a lot of trial and error testing because it is based on human behavior.
So let me follow up on that. How should marketers think differently about messaging when their buyers are evaluating risk and compliance, not just value proposition?
Well, based on what I said before, they shouldn't think differently, right? If you're going to base it on the truth and you're trying to essentially educate folks on what you feel is the right approach, then they shouldn't look at it differently. Now, I mean, there is certainly a difference between those in cybersecurity and or compliance or quality management that are a little bit more skeptical than the average person, and because it's their job, right? They have to be skeptical. They have to look out for some of the the little things that may sink a company or may sink an organization. So get in trouble, lose clients, right? Those are the things that they're paid to do, right? So they are a little bit more skeptical. But like I said, I mean, the approach should be based on truths and not half truths. And when you're presenting something or communicating, communicate as if you're communicating with a good friend of yours. Right. It should be more. I mean, we can get into this later if you like, but that's why I'm not a big fan of the kind of the corporate speak, right? Because you don't talk like that to someone else, and then that in itself kind of comes across as, okay, what's their angle here? Whereas if you come across more,
people will see right through that.
Yeah, if you come across humanly or humanely, you'll find a lot more success that way.
No, I agree. And when it comes to sales enablement, how do you balance telling a compelling story with what's being accurate and audit safe? And let me just follow up on that too. Where do most teams fall short?
If you're just trying to get something out of someone as opposed to give, that's where I think most companies fall short. Now, with regard to being audit safe from a security standpoint, there's obviously things that you're going to have to, get with either your legal team or your compliance team when you're a marketing person saying, hey, can I say this or that or the other? Is it a safe thing to say or publish to the public? But for the most part, I think if you're basing on your true story, right, then I don't see why they would have any issue with it.
Yeah, I mean, I am seeing that reoccurring theme in your answers. And I mean, that tells me that you're right. There's a genuine story that you're telling. There's a genuine approach that you have. Within highly regulated companies, if you're trying to align marketing with operations, who might not necessarily be sitting in the room together, if you're trying to align your marketing and operations, who needs to be in that room for the messaging to be real, not just aspirational?
To be honest, I think you have to take into account, and again, that goes back to that kind of like that weird dichotomy between the black and white disciplines like finance, perhaps even operations, and then marketing and sales, right? Sales and marketing is very behavioral driven. So when you have that, you have to have like, okay, well, these are the truths, or these are what we feel to be the truth. And then we gotta go to, well, how do we tell our story in and around that truth? I would take it in tiered approach, right? So there's the data collection and the kind of the brainstorming. In those discussions, I think you should have, folks on the operational side. I would definitely include folks in customer success because they see from the front lines kind of what's going on, right? They know what their clients do and do not like and what they do or do not appreciate. The good operational people and the great product people that I work with, particularly those at Estendio and those that I've worked at previously, they do kind of a ground up approach, right? So they kind of understand what customers and prospective customers are looking for, and then they build a product towards that, as opposed to say, okay, we're going to build a product and then we're going to try to shove it down people's throats. So I think you have to have a really good understanding of kind of what the market wants. And so you start with that kind of brainstorming session, and no decisions are made on communications or marketing approaches in that brainstorming session. The word decision comes from the word decide, right? Which comes from the Latin word of to kill, right? So when you're doing brainstorming, you should not be killing any ideas. It's all about creating ideas. Then you get to a point, then you gather as many people as you think you need, right? But maybe it's product side, but definitely have to have some sort of customer voice with marketing. And then you kind of go to the approach. And then I think marketing and sales should drum up a message. And then at the end, it gets approved. Because if there are too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, when it comes to messaging, not the brainstorming, not the data collection, but the messaging, I think it gets wildly diluted and then starts looking like corporate gobbledygook, right? Starts looking like everyone else.
All right. Now, let me ask you to put kind of your sales hat on for a little bit here. Now, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Companies will put together a white paper, have a white paper written, throw it out there and then say, okay, this is our lead generation component. Others will build a nurture engine. From your experience, what kind of marketing actually builds pipeline in complex B2B sales?
I don't think there's no silver bullet. And if there was a silver bullet and everyone would be using it, then it would lose its silver bulletness, if you will, right? I think there's a combination of different disciplines and different methods and mediums that you should be taking depending on your audience and how they approach things. Because of the prevalence or the growing prevalence of AI and, just generic content, if you will, I think it's increasingly important to have product in those discussions because it ties it back into the product. And then if you can have so that's one side, right? Tie your thought leadership into a product because it makes your solution a little bit more unique. But even more importantly, I think you should have kind of a voice of the company, right? Or multiple voices of the company, because that's not something you can replicate on AI, at least not yet, right? So if you have like some sort of authority individual or group of individuals, I think that helps kind of drive that home a little bit better, right? So what I would suggest now, right? I mean, what I would suggest 5 years ago is definitely not what I'd suggest now. So 5 years ago, I think that approach, like a white paper or thought leadership piece, it could be valuable. But I think now with AI, if you want to just either rank in those AI engines or more importantly, if you want to just build brand, I think branding is become more important. I think over the last 5, 10, maybe 15 years that you have to try to prove justification of your marketing spend. And brand, at least until recently, was very difficult to measure. What people start doing is it just based on performance marketing, because you can show a direct line to revenue, or at least a semi-direct line to revenue. Nowadays, though, it's going to be, first of all, people are a lot more skeptical because of AI. And so I think that there should be an approach where it comes for that only your company can deliver, right? It has to be maybe product related thought leadership, but definitely having voices in the organization, video, webinars, things that we're doing now, right? Podcasts, and perhaps even like industry studies that people can't necessarily replicate. You can't replicate someone's opinion. They're going to be super necessary. They're going to be the table stakes from now on, I think, because as cluttered as the waters, or the muddied as the waters were before, with AI, it's just taking it to an nth degree, and you got to find a better way to stand out, whether in the course of branding, authority, or some sort of product-based thought leader.
If the product itself is compliance focused, is there any difference in a content strategy that you would use? Where do you start if you have to put together a content strategy for a compliance focused product?
I think it comes down to your unique selling proposition, and for lack of a better term, in some instances, your brand, right? Where do you stand out? Why do you exist, right? If there are so many other compliance products or tools out there, why do you exist? What's your reason for being? Right. And then you just lean into that.
Okay. So some of the traditional blocking and tackling approach as well,
Yeah. I mean, if you're just going to put out a thought leadership piece around, okay, here's what compliance is. I mean, I can get that spit out in AI in 45 seconds, right? You can't do that anymore, unfortunately, or fortunately, because it makes you think a little bit stronger, more deeply, right? Into kind of what you bring to the table. For example, Astendio, in terms of it, we kind of build our platform in and around people and individuals, right? Because that's where a lot of the either security gaps come from, or from it's where some of the quality management gaps come from. People just check a box, and right, and most quality and or security issues stem from some level of human error. And so if you build a product or a process in and around people that help enable people, which is the root of the majority of the either security or quality management errors, sets you up for success and always audit ready posture. Shameless plug.
I was told that there was a trend in over documentation, especially on the marketing operations side. Do you agree with that? Do you see a danger of turning a marketing team into a compliance team? Like you said, like people buy on base how they feel, what they relate to. Like at the end of my cable contract, there's 17 pages of stuff that I just hit accept because I just want to get through and just be able to watch the game on the new service I just downloaded. You know what I mean?
That's a great point, because I think there are some parallels in that, right? So in the compliance world, there are more and more companies coming, being created, and a lot of those companies realize soon afterwards, or maybe they realized before, but that they need to become compliant in order to serve an industry. A lot of those folks are looking for ways to automate it. Now, there's a certain level of automation I think is critical, right? You have to be able to automate certain processes, otherwise it becomes a huge headache. But there has to be some level of human oversight. There has to be some level of humanity in it, and particularly when it comes to security and quality management. And I think the same kind of applies, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier with regard to marketing, right? You can spit out a document from AI, but is it really going to help you? Is it going to, I mean, you might be able to kind of say, I created a blog, or I created, right? So I think the compliance equivalent in marketing, or the auto compliance equivalent in marketing, would be like AI, right? Okay, I created a blog, I created a social post, right? I automated it all. It's just about box checking. But are you really secure? Your quality? Do you have any gaps in your quality management? Maybe, but you got that checkbox, so you'll never know, right? So I think the same thing with regard to now marketing. Again, I think there's a lot of dissimilarities, right, or a lot of differences between those that are more black and white disciplines than, sales and marketing, which are more based on human behavior. But I think that is a good parallel, right? Where you have, you check the box, but are you really successful, right? And you can really tell when you're successful and you're just checking the box. Whereas from a compliance, it's just kind of a black and white, but it we've seen in many instances that it could really come back to bite you in terms of either just not being able to pass a compliance test, or let's say when you're trying to, let's say break into new markets, and maybe this new market is a little bit more intense in terms of how they regulate, and then you're really stuck, right? And then you lose contracts, you lose the revenue, you lose reputation, everything that comes with it. So I think the same with marketing. If you're just going to spit out regular stuff, I think that the huge danger is just you'll sound like everyone else, and if you're trying to kind of, it'll fall flat. It'll fall flat, and you'll be ignored.
Companies about to launch a product that's both technical and compliance heavy. What should their marketing team do before the campaign goes live?
There's a lot of compliance, right? There's quality management compliance. There's security, cybersecurity compliance. There's different types of compliance. There's compliance with legal regulations, right? There's compliance is a very broad term. It just means that your whatever your discipline is, it's up to the standards, right? Or the standards that are set by a certain framework or regulating body, right? So it's a kind of a broad statement, but I with regard to, let's say, security compliant or quality management compliance, which is what we Stendio focuses on, really, that doesn't really touch marketing messaging necessarily, or marketing approaches, though you have to use tools that are security compliant, and they're compliant with the way that you with your, it has to be aligned with your security framework and your security posture, right? You can't use just any old.
And like you said, there's compliance is kind of a broad term, with respect to cybersecurity. It can't just be some cookie cutter generic message, which has kind of been what the point of this whole conversation over the last half hour has been. So I think it's kind of fitting that, we wrap it up like
Sounds
that.
Good.
It's kind of come. It's come full circle.
Yeah, it has to be based. I mean, I think if you would draw any parallels between compliance and marketing, right, it has to be based on some level of truth. It has to be based on your own particular scenario, right? I could create I could just find let's say a policy and procedure off of the web and say, oh, well, let's just apply it to our company. Well, does it apply to our company, right? And I think the same thing applies to marketing, right? I could just borrow the market leader's messaging and just tweak it. Well, if you're going to use the same message as the marketing leader, then folks are just going to default to the marketing leader. If you're exactly the same, right, and you provide the same messaging and if you take the same approach, why don't they just default, right? No one got fired by using IBM. So I think there's a lot of parallels in terms of the compliance and marketing worlds, but it all has to be based in truth, right? And so right, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's quality management, it has to be based on truths, right? You can't cut corners, because it ends up biting you one way or the other.
Right. It sounds generic. Your message gets lost, and you'll get out of it what you put into it, which is basically nothing.
Yeah, and it could be a detriment. I think back in the day, let's say 20, 30 years ago. If there are companies that like to be, somewhat conservative in their messaging. And I think that worked to a certain point. But nowadays, I'm not saying conservative politically, obviously, or, ethically or whatever it is, but I'm saying like being very vanilla with your messaging. But nowadays, if you're not, and then people say, well, let's avoid the risk by being more vanilla. Nowadays, I think you're taking upon more risk by being more cookie cutter, because you're not going to stand out. There's no way.